I'll ask you just first about your Medical Debt Relief Act. Read a little bit about it and a little bit of a description, but maybe a little bit of the specifics of it you can explain and how it would benefit Americans.
One-third of Oregonians are struggling with medical debt, extraordinary number. And when this goes into the credit reporting system, it makes it hard for them to buy a car. It certainly damages their ability to borrow to buy a home. And very significantly, it increases the odds that they will not get medical care they need to begin with. And so we need to get this medical debt out of the credit reporting system completely.
If there isn't the incentive to obviously, have the negative effects on the credit report, how do we get people to pay back their medical debt?
Well, certainly we have to recognize that a lot of that debt is because insurance companies are turning down clients under a business strategy in which they say no to everything, forcing folks to have to lobby and say, no, wait, this insurance was supposed to cover this. And it can take years to get the insurance company, because they're profit oriented, to actually release that. So a lot of this debt is completely illegitimate. And realize too that this debt is the factor from a broken medical system where if you're outside of an insurance plan, you're charged many multiples. And unlike in other countries that negotiate the price of their drugs, we Americans are ripped off on the price of drugs. So do we want illegitimate debt to proceed to handicap families forever? And do we want people to be able to go ahead and live their lives? Certainly, they continue to have an incentive to try to clear up the medical debt that they have, so it's no longer hanging over them. That's an incentive. They don't need to. We don't need to kind of essentially destroy the rest of their life as a process of collecting for insurance companies that are often putting illegitimate bills forward to begin with.
I'll ask you about USPS downgrades here in Eugene. Obviously, we're facing this situation, but you're looking to block this.
Yes, this is an effort by the Postal Service to essentially slow down mail. And for example, you want to mail to your neighbor in Eugene, that letter is going to have to go to Portland, be sorted, and then mailed back. And of course, it's going to slow down delivery times. Delivery times will be essential not to just first-class mail. It can affect the delivery times for drugs that seniors may be getting through the mail, or anyone may be getting through the mail. It can have a big impact on small businesses attempting to get products to customers, or to get a supply chain for things that they're producing. So in every possible way, it's a degrading of the mail system that will hurt folks in Eugene and Medford and really that entire regions of the state. So I'm pushing hard to try to prevent this from happening.
Do we need to be appropriating more money to USPS?
Well, the complexities of the Postal Service finance are kind of mysteries wrapped in a riddle, or some version of that Churchill expression. A very big factor in the past is that they were in the red because they were pre-considering the entire retirement requirements of their employees long before those requirements were ever encountered. We've now addressed that, so we've done a lot to already rectify the solvency of the post office.
Good to hear. Jim Jordan has gone down twice now as Speaker of the House. We've talked about the Speaker of the House after they vacated the seat. From your perspective in the Senate, how do you view the situation going on in the other chamber?
Well, we've had a couple hundred years of working to have a functioning democracy that requires to be able to elect your leaders in each chamber, but vicious tribal partisanship is getting in the way of serving the American people. It's so important to have our Republican colleagues in the House get their act together. We've got spending bills that need to pass. We have supplemental bills related to Israel, related to Ukraine, related to the border that need to be developed. And we are facing a potential government shutdown on November 17th. So some form, I'm hoping the House can get some form of power sharing agreement together, work in a bipartisan way. All of the spending bills came out of our Senate appropriations bill with broad bipartisan support. We need the same spirit in the House of Representatives.
And you mentioned Israel, obviously, top of mind by President Biden in Israel today. And with the with no speaker of the House and the situation unfolding in Israel, I mean, it seems like we are at a dangerous point where, I mean, no yesterday, Representative Michael McCall was talking about, if we wanted to have any military action in the region, we can't without Speaker of the House, essentially. Is this threatening our ability to act with what's going on in Israel?
No, not necessarily immediately, because we do have military supplies, we have military ships in the region. But let me be very clear. We have to be 100% solid that targeting of hospitals, of schools, of water systems, of power systems is completely illegitimate. And we have to have extreme concern over the potential ground offensive that could put millions of innocent Palestinians at risk. You know, those Palestinians in Gaza are as much victims of Hamas as folks outside of Gaza. And so we need to be standing with Israel in their grief over the horrific terrorist attack. But we also have to be absolutely clear that a strategy of war that targets and kills civilians is also completely unacceptable.
Is it your opinion that Israel has already targeted civilians?
Israel has stated that they are doing all they can to avoid targeting civilians. I'll leave it to the military experts to sort out the situation, but it is the case in the past that they have bombed schools and hospitals, and that cannot happen. And we need to send that message very clearly.
So is there concern, do you have concern that Israel has possibly committed war crimes?
Thomas Friedman has laid a real expert on the Middle East, has laid out how a ground offensive can play directly into Iran's strategy in the Middle East. That strategy includes entangling Israel in the West Bank and entangling them in Gaza in ways that damage both America's interests in the region and Israel's interest in the region. As we stand with Israel, we must also be the partner who says everything must be done to protect civilians.
And do you feel like that's also President Biden's message?
President Biden has conveyed that message. It needs to be conveyed at every level of government.
Meanwhile, you still continue to push for funding for Ukraine. I know the concern among some people is that this is going to distract us from that situation. I'm assuming you are still pushing for that funding for Ukraine and our continued support there.
If we fail to support Ukraine, it will be a Munich moment. Remember when Chamberlain went to Munich and said to Hitler, it's okay if you take a big slice out of Czechoslovakia, we'll just declare peace in our time. And that moment forward, Hitler went on a global rampage that became World War II. We have to stand with the freedom-loving people of Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom of speech, their freedom to vote, their freedom of worship, their freedom of assembly. They want to have a democratic republic that can control their own future, not be under any imperialist thumb of Putin or an authoritarian government in Ukraine. And they have stood up for their freedoms time and time again. They are pursuing this goal with their lives on the line. We, as the foremost champion of democracy in the world, have to stand by their side. If we do anything else, It will fracture the Atlantic Alliance. It will undermine NATO. It will be a huge benefit to the authoritarian power of China and Russia. We cannot afford a Munich moment.
Do you fear that Russia could be involved in this situation in Israel? Is that a conspiracy to look at it as maybe Russia, is distracting from what's happening in Ukraine by creating a situation in Israel?
I've seen no indication of that. There will be confidential briefings going on in the future. And certainly, I'm sure our intelligence agencies are looking at every possible connection. I think the foremost concern they're looking at is any connection with Iran.